Good morning. I'm Pastor Megan Owens, and I want to welcome you to Express Church at the Menifee United Church of Christ. Express Church is a time to gather together whenever you would like to. We will post the video on Sundays each week, and it will be a short prayer, a time where you can write a prayer request, a name, or a situation you would like me to pray for you throughout the week into the chat. Then we'll read scripture and have a sermon. Bada bing, bada boom, done. You've had your little gathering with God, and the 2 or 3 or million or 100 or just the 2 of us at that time who might be with you over the internet in this interesting worship space that we call Facebook, YouTube, Zoom. It's an interesting time. And for that time and place, we have Express Church. I will be going through the Revised Common Lectionary for those of you who are familiar with that. And I hope that you will join us each week. And perhaps if you like Express Church, you will consider joining us for our regular Zoom church. And I will tell you a bit about how to do that after the sermon. Have a great day and welcome. Good morning. Today we're going to do Matthew 22, verses 34 through 40. But before we get to that, we're going to pray together. I'm going to ask you to pray the Lord's Prayer with me. And if you have any prayer requests, please put them in the chat, and I will be praying for you this week. So please pray with me. O Divine One in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom and the power and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. So this week I'm reading from the Inclusive New Testament and Psalms. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked Jesus a question as a test. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? Jesus said to him, You shall love the sovereign your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So again, the Pharisees try to trap Jesus with a question using a lawyer friend of theirs. Now, this whole setup reminds me of a story about the Jewish philosopher Hillel, who lived around the same time as Jesus, a little bit earlier, but very close to the turn of the millennia. And a potential convert, came to Hillel and said, If you can teach me all of the law and the prophets while I stand on one leg, I will convert to Judaism. And Hillel says to this person, Do unto your neighbor what is not distasteful for yourself. On this rests the entire law. The rest is commentary. Go and learn. Jesus might have heard this story. And he's using that same idea of helping us to see the grace in the law, in the prophets, the grace behind creating a daily life that is dedicated to God. Because when they come to him with this trap, which commandment in the law is the greatest? Jesus answers with 2, really. Remember that Matthew sees Jesus as a Moses figure. He is there to reinterpret the law, or really to remind people of that law. So Jesus answers, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus is intentionally invoking the heart and sinew of Jewish faith. These two scriptures from Deuteronomy and Leviticus, respectively, sort of encase Jewish faith. And in fact, love your neighbor as yourself is the second part of a verse that is called the Shema, which is the statement of faith in the Jewish community. Shema means hear, because it's "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one." Faith in this God and seeing grace in the daily practice of 613 laws, not all at once, but yes, there are 613 mitzvot. This is the heart and sinew of the Jewish faith. So in essence, Jesus is saying, love God with all that you have and all that you are, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then naturally your actions will reflect the 613 mitzvot. Jesus is not replacing this concept. He is invoking it. He is reminding the religious authorities that are approaching him the important core of their own faith. This is a passage that we think is about commandments, but Jesus reminds us that it is really about love. Our love for God and our love for one another. Between the lines of it, of course, is the grace of that love, a reflection of that love that God has for us. The grace is that borne out by how we live in the world, our daily living and our public lives. One thing that cannot coexist with God's love is fear. And just look at our world today. There is so much fear. Nations are built on the concept of fear of someone else, of something else, of what you're going to lose. Not on what are we going to gather together in love and build. There is so much fear. Read the headlines. Look at what's happening around us. Can't we just lock ourselves away from it? And herein lies the rub. When we lock ourselves away from fear, we also lock ourselves away from love, from life. Avoiding fear causes us to act in ways that won't allow love in. When our process in life is fear or avoidance of fear, we miss out on God's love. Avoiding fear is a hard job. It takes a lot of energy. And there is no energy left to act in love because fear causes us to protect ourselves from what we fear. And that grows and grows and grows. But love pushes fear out or over to the sidelines or helps us walk through it. It is the knowledge of God's love that gives us the strength to walk boldly with one another, arm in arm, buoyed by the presence of the Spirit beyond that fear. The more we allow fear to rule our hearts, the more fear rules our lives. Only by opening up to love can we begin to overcome our own fears. We are called to hold space for community that is rooted in this love essence of God. We must work together, inspired by how much we are loved. There is no real relationship when we are living in judgment. When we are afraid of God or of each other, how do we find God's love? We find it when we move away from being right to creating and holding space for right relationship. We enact that love of self and neighbor when we move away from fear and judgment, God's and each other's. We love God with our whole selves when we walk boldly into struggle and a life that is bathed in a love that is greater than even death. And that process always starts in our own hearts. Let's start with that passage, as ourselves, just that phrase. Because often what is blocking us from loving ourselves is going to block us from truly loving our neighbors. So what fears are in our own hearts? I'll start with my own heart. Things that I fear, that everyone will discover that I'm a big fake, that it is all a sham, that really I know nothing and can do nothing effective here or anywhere, that no one is listening, that I am not perfect, that I will never know complete security, that the nasty things that people say about me have a ring of truth. How much time I have wasted dissecting them and myself to take a hard look at the situation, and how much joy and reality I have lost by constantly focusing on how to be better. That I will die a complete failure, that no one will care that I have lived, that there is always someone who has achieved or did something better, more adventurous, or more interesting, and that's probably true. But the fear in my heart is that it cancels out my own achievements, that I'm really as stupid as I think I am, that one day I will lose my mind completely, that I'm not good enough, that people hate me, that no one supports me, and that I don't deserve to be happy or successful. So these things might sound familiar to some of you or not, or you might have your own list. These are all things that have gone through my mind, and I do my best to work through them, to grow, and to not let the negative whispers rule my heart. In some circumstances, I have to sit and honor them, or at least their roots, so that I can neutralize them. Then I can turn to God's love to help me fill the spaces that casting out fear can create. I was once trying for something very hard for many years and it didn't work out. And I realized that I had been holding that achievement right here for so long, and I couldn't see beyond it. And it wasn't really giving me joy. So I said to myself, what have you not been doing? What gives you pure joy? And as it turned out, the answer to that was acting in plays. I want to act in plays. I want to do theater again. Because I had put doing theater on hold while I went after this goal. And so I did. I started auditioning around in the area where I was living, and I started doing theater again, and it brought me joy. That was God's love, filling the hole of not having that achievement with the joy of doing something that was pure and beautiful and came from the heart. And sometimes this God love comes in the guise of people, activities, and sometimes it comes in the guise of service. The only real way to live this fully is to understand that perfecting love is a goal, a process, and not a final destination. To truly live in love, we must risk facing and overcoming fears. Those fears inside ourselves and our fears of other people, other cultures, other ways of thinking. We must, as the saying goes, set the table, not build the wall. Only in this way will we truly be safe from the demons that possess humans and breed violence in us. Maybe what we are hearing today is that when we are asked what we do, who we are, we answer it through the space of God's perfecting love. This is not a list of accomplishments. Just say, what I have to show for my life is me. I have me and all of the wonderful things that is. And it includes every experience and every worldly success, yes. But it is more than that. I have a picture of Daphne. It's a photograph of a statue of Daphne turning into a reed. Now, Daphne was chased by Apollo and she didn't love him. So she was the daughter of a river god and she called on her father to save her. And he turned her into a reed by the river's edge. This picture reminds me that I am more than the sum of my parts, much more than the sum of my external stuff. And so are you. In those moments when we find our worth in, I have me to show, we understand that God is love. And from that space, we can actively love the world, which gets us to the love your neighbor part. God is love is a great gift to us, and we have to pay it forward. Harness those fears, move them aside, and walk into the light and love of God. Extend a hand to that person over there and work in the world to help benefit that person over here, knowing that we are walking together toward the goal of love. Working together for the greater good of our community creates a synergy that perfects that love. If our lives are informed by loving God with all that we have, with all that we are, as God's beloved children, our everyday lives will focus on adding seats to the table, restoring justice, taking the risks that transform. That reality takes a difference in the way we view the nuts and bolts of stuff in budgets and organizations, in our own homes, in our lives. And the decisions that we make will reflect a concern that goes beyond our own small circles, but has the consideration for others whose voices may not be heard. When it is hard to tell that the arc really does bend toward justice, or that the arc feels too long, pause and remember that spirit is still here as a reminder of the presence of God's love among us. As we remember God's work and love among us is eternal, it helps us to let go of control with an open heart. If we are bold that the future will also resemble the God in whom we dwell, then we trust that all loss is, in some way, in its own time, an avenue to resurrection. When we center ourselves not in the world's immediate interests or anxious fears, but in God's claims and intentions for that world, we remember the one to whom we are finally accountable and from whom we draw our strength. And from this conviction, we find that we are bold in love before God, before the world, loving our neighbor as ourselves. And in that way, loving God with all that we are. Be well, my friends. So thanks for joining us for this week's Express Church. If you're enjoying Express Church, consider joining us at 11 a.m. on Sundays for our Zoom full worship. You can request to have the link sent to you by sending an email to uccmenifee@gmail.com. Menifee is Menifee. uccmenifee@gmail.com. If you're not quite ready for the full-length service, you can join us every other Thursday for a meditative service that we do as a Vespers. And of course, on Wednesdays, we will be discussing Diana Butler Bass's Grateful. Please join us for any of these things, or just keep on coming to Express Church. We're so glad you're here. Have a great week.